Hi there, this is Steven, and in this video I wanted to introduce Substance Painter and just the very basics of kind of getting around and painting in Substance Painter and show you some quick and easy ways to paint on a model. In this case, it's a character that I've been designing in Maya. So a couple things I want to kind of bring up is the interface is pretty wide open right now. Like when you first open it up, this is kind of what you see. So there's a couple things that kind of gets you into working with the tools a little more directly. So if you hit tab or you press tab on the keyboard, you're going to get rid of all the windows and widgets that are around the edges, all these panels, and it basically just closes them. If you press tab again, it's going to reopen them, which is kind of a nice way to work if you want to get all these panels really open. If you hit tab, you can also see that it puts all these widgets into, or all these panels into a little shortcut bar here that you can open. So if I wanted to open up, let's say this one is the shelf. If I want to get at the shelf really quick, I could do that and then just hover over some of the materials or one of the categories here, and I can see what material or what, all these different capabilities in Painter, and particles are really cool, but I'm going to start off with brushes. So I'm going to collapse that. I can click that, or I can click close right there. And again, I can hit tab, and this is all down here, like the shelf is down here, and the parameters for the brushes here. So I can press tab and get back to the main, just cleaning up the interface and making sure that all I'm doing is working as painting. The second thing to present here is this is my model in 3D, and it uses the same if you're used to Maya and the shortcut tools in Maya. It uses the same keys in Maya or the shortcuts in Maya to kind of move around, right? So if I hold down Alt or Option and I just left click, I can, tumble. If I middle mouse, I can dolly the camera in and out. Again, that's not zooming, it's just moving the camera in and out. It might seem like it's the same function, but it actually gets you closer to your object, moves the camera in closer. And then right clicking and holding down Alt moves it around. So I get to use those same kind of capabilities from Maya if you're using Maya. You can always change your shortcuts if you want to in Painter, but since I use Maya a lot, I do that. And you'll also notice with kind of the default thing is when I press Alt or Option, it shows me what other things that I can do with that shortcut key, which is kind of cool. It's a nice little tip. So if I hold down, in my case, I'm on a Mac, if I hold down Command, I can see everything that I can choose from Command. So if there's a Command Shift, it'll filter all the commands that I could do with that. So that's kind of a nice little shortcut to show you that. Anyway, the other thing that I'm going to point out is right now it shows the model here, and it shows a 2D view of the UV layout. And you can use the same kind of tools to move around, kind of dolly in and out, but it's a 2D view. I can turn that on and off. I can just go to, right now it's the 2D, 3D view. I can go to just the 3D view or just the 2D view, right? I could just paint right on top of the UVs, or I can go to 3D view, and which is very typical, just painting right on top of the model. So what I'm going to end up doing is I'm just going to kind of start. Here I have this brush, and I'm going to open up my shelf. I'm just going to press tab, and I'm going to go down to materials. I'm going to start with materials, and I'm going to start with just one of these materials here. And if you hover over long enough, usually it'll pop up and it'll show you what it is. So this is human back skin, human belly skin, like different, capabilities built into that. So I'm going to choose that brush, or I'm going to choose that material, and I can just drag and drop that material right on top of the mesh, and it's going to fill that mesh with that color, right? Unless I have it masked, there's masks that you can do. So I'm going to undo that, but I also want to point out when you do that, like when I have that selected and I'm over here in the paint tools or the texture sets, right? There's a layers panel, which I can build layers like Photoshop. I can make multiple layers, and whatever layer is on the top is the frontmost layer. And I can build different capabilities into the layer. The texture set settings, what I can do is it's showing me what surface it is. And since this came from Maya and I was using the Arnold substance, the standard surface, it's showing me that name. Right, and then I can kind of scroll down and I can see the different channels that are capable: a base color, a height map, roughness, metallic, and a normal map. Right, and so I can also choose which mesh maps to bake. Right, so I can do that here, but I can also bake them elsewhere. So I could just bake those in, choose a mesh map that I want to bake in. So I'm just going to close that for right now. And then I'm going to go down here to the paint properties, right? And if you scroll down, you'll notice these buttons right here are kind of shortcuts to take you further down in this scrolling. So the top one is the brush parameters, right? Size and flow. And then I have the stroke opacity and spacing. But I'm going to go down here. That's the alpha channel and stencil. And down here, it's the material property. So I have color, height, and roughness. Right now, those are the three that are active based on this material. I can choose not to use a height map and a roughness and just choose the color of that material. But this particular material has a color and a height and a rough because it's got bumpy skin, right? That's kind of the idea, is this material has those three different channels. So when I bake them, I'm going to have a height map or a displacement map, a color map, and a roughness, right? So I can change the color of that material right here. I can just adjust the color by changing it. So if I want something like, a little darker, right? Or I want to change that to, however I want to change that, the parameters of that color, I can do that. Right? So that's how I can change the color of the brush. And then I can just flood that on the character with those parameters. Now let's say that I wanted to kind of brush something in. So let's say I go down to, I'm going to go up to brushes here. And let's say I have this artistic brush or just a regular brush. I can again go down here and look at what colors are available. So I have this brush active. I'm going to scroll all the way up here. So this little PS down here, it indicates that it's a Photoshop, you could see ABR brush. So it says unsupported features are texture, dual brush, buildup, and smoothing, right? So, but I have different brushes like the artistic brush. So anytime I see that little PS, it's a Photoshop brush. So I can choose, like, say this one. So if I want to paint with that brush, what I need to do, I can come over here to this layers panel and I can make a new layer, because that human bumpy skin is one layer that's now flooded on the character. So I'm going to move that one down below this layer and I can start painting with that brush now. And I'm just going to come down here to color. And now I can start brushing in a different color. Right, so it's still using this material, this bumpy skin material, but I can choose a different color. Let's say that I wanted, something that's a little bit more like this. And then I can also use the eraser, right? I'm using a Cintiq. So when I'm painting with one side, like the normal side of the pen, and I flip it over, I can actually erase with that, right? You can also see that if I want to change the size of that brush, if I use the bracket keys, so the right bracket key will increase the size of the brush, the left bracket key will decrease the size of the brush, right? And so since I'm using a Cintiq, the harder I press, it actually makes the brush larger, but this is the largest parameter of that brush. So I'm going to come back over, so I'm going to increase the size of this brush and I can paint, right? If I press down harder, I can actually get a little bit more paint coming out of this, right? And then if I want to erase, I can erase, but then I can decrease the size of that. And then if I want, I'm just pressing very lightly. If you're using a mouse, it's fine too. You can kind of paint with the mouse, right? And it just uses that size of the brush. It doesn't have pressure sensitivity like the Cintiq, but this will actually kind of give you a pretty good idea of how you would paint with that, right? So I'm going to use Option. And I'm going to kind of move this around a little bit so I can start painting, on this character, right? And I can scroll it around a little bit and paint on the other side, right? And so it's going to paint wherever, kind of in a 3D mode, wherever, that brush winds up. And you can kind of see that it doesn't paint on the other side. It doesn't go all the way through. So I can kind of keep painting. Right? And if I paint right here, until I get over here, you can see how the brush is following the contours until I get over into the face. And I don't really want that. So I'm going to undo and I can kind of paint around. The other kind of cool thing that you can do, and I haven't turned it on yet, but right now I'm only painting on one side of the character. If I want paint on both sides, I'm going to turn on Symmetry. And if you see this button right up here, if you turn that on, if you click that, you can see where the symmetry goes down the middle of the character, right? I can move the symmetry across. If I hold down shift, it's going to snap, and I can snap it right back to the middle, right? So when I do that, if I paint over on this side, you're going to see that it's painting on the other side symmetrically. Now, if I wanted it forward and back, I can actually rotate this around and do a different object symmetry. But since this character, I want to be symmetrical on either side, whoop, I painted over the character's face, I could just keep, painting on one side, and it's going to paint on the other side because it's working in that object symmetry, as I mentioned, right? So that kind of gets you sort of started in terms of the paint tools. Now, I'm going to get this kind of corrected here a little bit. And even the eraser, by the way, works in object symmetry. So a couple other things to point out is one really cool feature of Substance Painter are the smart materials. So if you go down in the shelf to the smart materials, you'll see that it's kind of built up a whole bunch of these materials down here that have a lot of different parameters. So let's say I wanted to take this wood ship and then apply it to the character. What I could do is then right click and drag it over to the layers panel and let it go. And what this is going to do, I'm going to move it up above and hide these other two layers. What this is going to do, you see a lot of different parameters. Now, this probably isn't ideal for this character, but just to kind of illustrate a point, when you look at this, you're going to see it's a folder. And when you open that folder, there's a whole bunch of stuff that's part of that smart material. So it has a lot of other capabilities built inside of it, a lot of other layers that have been designed for a certain effect. And so you can kind of achieve a quick effect and modify the parameters of that, right? So maybe this wood ship whole Nordic is not going to work out well for this character, so I can kind of delete that. And let's see if there's anything else that might be kind of a good use for this character. Let's take this leather material and move it over here, right? And then I'm going to move it up. And so maybe that would work out for certain areas of the character, right, that I want to have affected, right? So what I could do then is add a mask to this. So I'm going to add a mask, just a white mask, right? And then if I paint on top of this layer, you're going to notice that I'm able to mask that out. And let's increase the size of my brush here. So I'm going to keep painting that in. Whoop. And I can erase that, right? And so I can get this brush to kind of fill the areas. Maybe leather is not the best kind of attire for this character, but then I can zoom in, right? Kind of get a little area here around the neck, let's say, right? And then I'll look at that, right? So that's kind of masking that out. So I've created a mask with that. And now if I apply the other materials, you see that the layer that I created that mask on, right, and that I just painted a mask on, has done that. And so if I want to switch back to the material, that's if I want to continue painting on the mask. So if I want, I can come over here to the hand or whatever, and then paint across the hand, right, to get an idea of, that I'm just painting out. I'm using a mask to paint out the areas that I don't want to be affected by that smart material. So hopefully that kind of helps you to kind of get started on a way to kind of paint things out, use masks, and use smart materials. There's a lot of other capabilities built into Substance Painter, but that might be a good way for you to get started and start working on a character. And you notice since I had Symmetry on, it was painting or masking out the hands on the other side of the character, right? And I can get really close in here and I can start painting out a lot of details. You know, I can get the brush to be a lot smaller and then kind of get it, you know, probably would have the character, you know, kind of modeled with some clothing on rather than it looking like it's just his skin. But I can also paint this in to make it look like it's details on top. Right? So then I can add other details. I can go back to brushes and kind of add another brush. Maybe I want to have another layer. You know, I can add another layer to this and then paint on top of that. You can also add a lot of other, say, particles, which are kind of cool, and you can kind of experiment and play around with these as much as to your heart's content. So when I'm dealing with brushes, just remember, I've been using this mask to paint out the areas that are not this leather. So right now I've selected that I'm on the mask layer. So if I want to start painting kind of on the where the leather is, where I've kind of applied this smart material, I want to make sure that I open that up. And I can paint on another one of these layers, but I can also make a whole another layer. I can make a new paint layer and then assign that and then start painting on top of that based on kind of the material that I have chosen. Or I can change this. I don't actually have to use that material. I can actually turn off that material and choose just a base color for what I want to paint. You know, let's say that I wanted to put a trim around this or something, and let's say I wanted to have like a dark trim. And I'm going to choose this chalk. And I'm going to make sure I'm going to choose the normal map. I don't want to choose metal or roughness. I can use height if I want a height map on it, but then I can start painting sort of details into this character, you know, and get a lot closer if I want to get a lot more detailed, right? And get in here and, you know, add like trim around this leather if I needed to, right? You know, just kind of get that going. And if I want to, you know, kind of look back on it, I can also, you can paint in kind of the normal map of it. So right now I'm not kind of raising it up a little bit. So if I want to start adding some details in here to give it a little surface relief, like if I want to raise this a little bit, I'm going to choose a brush that I can kind of add to that a little bit. And then I'm going to go down here to the height map. I'm going to go to this height map and I'm going to just add a little bit of this going towards a positive direction. And what I can do with that is I can actually make a little indentation, right? So I can actually do that. So if I want to paint a little bit of information in here to make the skin lower or this raised up, what I can do is I'm going to collapse this and I'm going to go to where this, you know, human bumpy skin, which is the skin layer there. And I'm just going to add a new paint layer above that. And I'm going to, since it doesn't have a material node and I have, like if I have color, I can just choose height and normal and then bring this slider up a little bit. And then I can just start painting in. And it's probably a little too much. So just a little bit of detail in there if I wanted to. Oop. Got a little carried away. I could just start painting in an area where that's going to be dropped down a little bit. And I'm going to get a little bit of surface relief out of that. So I can just paint in areas that I want to go a little bit lower if I need to, right? Again, sometimes it's good to have, you know, the geometry layer to deal with there, but I can also paint it in, you know. So that should be a pretty good start for you on learning a little bit about Substance Painter and how to paint and how to control layers and how to kind of get it going the right direction. And now what I want to do, now that I have some painted surfaces, I'm at the point where I'm going to export these textures. And since I'm using Maya, I'm going to bring them back and put them back into my Maya project. So I'm going to go to Export Textures. Since I'm using Maya, I putting it into the source images directory, which is where the textures need to go. It says the output template is this PBR metallic roughness, but I'm going to change that. I'm going to come down here and I'm going to look for, and I'm looking for the Arnold AI standard. And then I'm just going to keep it as a PNG, which is fine. I could, my preferred one is using Targa, but a PNG will work just fine for these purposes. And the size is based on the texture set size, which I've already had set from the beginning. And I'm going to just go ahead and go to export. And once it's exported, you can see that it's exported these files. I can close that, and now I have the exported files. In the next video, I'm going to show you how to bring those exported textures, those baked textures, into Maya and set them up on this model. You can watch that next video and learn how to connect those textures to your object or your model in Maya.